Welcome to episode 71 of Rubbish Talk with myself, Alistair Meldrum.
And myself, Jane Bond.
And today we have Michael Cook from Circular Communities Scotland. So welcome, Michael.
Great to be with you today.
So just to kick off, Michael, can you let the listeners know briefly a bit about yourself and how you got involved in the circular economy world?
Sure. So I'm Michael Cook. I'm CEO of Circular Communities Scotland. Been with the charity for about 7 years. It's probably fair to say I came into the circular economy, as maybe quite a few do, by accident. I started my career in financial services and consulting, moved on to the third sector, to the charitable sector, and this is my third leadership job in the charitable sector. And I was attracted to this role, the opportunity to work nationally in Scotland and deliver social and environmental impact. So that's how I came in, but it wasn't part of a master plan or anything like that. But I've been here 7 years now and delighted to be in this role.
How big a team is Circular Communities Scotland? How big a team is it?
So we have 10 staff, not all of them full time. And that's grown in my time. When I joined, there were 3 staff plus myself when I joined. So we've grown a bit over the years. Yeah, so a growing team.
Circularly, what is it that the charity does then? What's the role of it?
So if you imagine a piece of paper with 3 circles, a Venn diagram with 3 circles, overlapping circles, and you overlay our name on that into each circle, so Circular Communities Scotland, that's what we do. So we actually rebranded a few years ago, and it was literally as obvious a name as that. And so we work in Scotland. We're not England. We're not Wales. Not Northern Ireland. That's probably fairly easy to understand. And our policy work is focused very much on Holyrood and Edinburgh rather than Westminster, say. We work with the third sector, so that's the communities word. So we're a membership organisation, and all of our members are charities or social enterprises working in the third circle, which is circular economy. And I'm sure some of your listeners will be very familiar with that term, others less so. But it's everything to do with reuse, repair, recycling, sharing. So our members are charities, social enterprises working with resources, with waste, trying to make the best use of those for social and environmental impact. And our role as a membership body is 2 ways: support our membership, help them to grow, but also to represent our membership and to call for policies that will create a more circular economy.
Okay, that sounds interesting, although I'm still not entirely sure what it means. So can you give us a basic practical example of, say, one of your members and an example of what you could potentially do for them, or how you work with that member would be quite useful, if that's okay, Michael.
Yeah, well, let me give you 2, because this week I visited 2 of our members. And they're very fresh in my mind. So I went into Edinburgh and I visited the Edinburgh Remakery, and I visited the bike station. So that's 2 of our members on the high street in Edinburgh. The Remakery, they're all about repair. They're a charity. They're all about encouraging repair, and they do that through various ways. So they run workshops for the public to give them the skills that they need to repair their clothes, to repair other items that they have in their house, and have the skills to make items last longer. But they also have a commercial arm, which is all about tech repair. And so they collect old laptops, old desktops, old monitors, phones, service those. If they can be reused, they reuse them. If they're broken, they can be repaired, they repair them. And if they can't, they obviously recycle them and use as many parts as they can in their repair business. And that's a commercial service. But they're not there to make money per se. They don't want to lose it, but they want to survive. They want to have a sustainable service, but they also do stuff with that tech that overcomes digital poverty, be that selling it to those that can afford, or be that giving it away. So they had a program a couple of years ago that was giving tech to recently arrived refugees, for example. At the bike station, completely different material. It's not tech, it's not textiles, it's bikes. And they are all about encouraging active travel in Edinburgh and making it a more pleasant city to live in through their active travel work. And obviously, cycling has lots of benefits: physical health, mental health, pollution, all sorts of things. But they particularly are a member of ours because they do bike reuse in that. So there's a lot of bikes that have come to the end of their current life with an owner, and they can get donated to the bike station. Some of those are good to go and sell straight away. Some of them need some work. So they have obviously staff that service those bikes. They'll also service the bikes for the public, bring their own bike in, get it fixed, maybe even learn the skills how to maintain that bike at the same time.
Okay.
Now, what
Brilliant.
those two members have in common, very different materials that they work with, but what I would summarize it is they work with people and they work with stuff. And it's about changing people's behavior to be more sustainable. And it's about reframing our relationship with the stuff of our lives to make them last longer, so that we don't see items just as a waste to throw away, but we see them as a resource to keep in use for as long as possible. And so that's the interplay between the people and the resources stream or the waste stream. In terms of our role in relation to that, that what we call support and represent, that's really the two directions of it. So we've actually recently reviewed our strategy, and we've said that what we want to do is we want to build capacity in our members through our services. So we, for example, run events. Lots of events, annual conference, regional forums, funding seminar, technical seminars like marketing seminars, trying to work out what is it that's stopping our members from growing and from thriving, and how can we resource them, particularly in our niche space of the circular economy. So that would be about, our funding seminar. It's what I call speed dating for funders. So we get as many funders along that are willing to invest in circular economy projects, have a brief project from them, the members can ask questions, and then after that event, they can hopefully go away and apply for those funds, which can release new resources for their organization. On the other side, it's represent, and we've recently published a manifesto. I'm sure there'll be an opportunity to talk about that a bit later, Reuse First Manifesto. It's really calling for the policies that we think will make the most difference in our progress to a circular economy, and help us have more projects like the Edinburgh Remakery or the Edinburgh Bike Station.
So that's interesting, and that explains it quite well there, Michael. So, I mean, we've been looking at the waste hierarchy. So we've kind of done the don't produce the waste in the first place, and now and the reuse side. So basically, you're on the reuse, really, aren't you? That's where you're looking at reuse and recovery of stuff.
I think that is broadly true. 260 members, there are exceptions within that, of course, but it's interestingly that some of your listeners who have been in the sector a long time, our name has actually changed over time. So we were founded in 2004 as Community Recycling Network Scotland, and at that time, the groups were coming into being, who wanted to deliver recycling in their community because curbside collection wasn't covering lots of different materials. Over time, that landscape has changed, and obviously local authorities have grown with obviously private sector contracts, and community recycling sector is much smaller than it was 20 years ago, because it's mainly, the big waste players that are delivering recycling centres across the country. So we changed our name to the Community Resources Network Scotland. So it was CRNS still, but it was resources, not recycling. And that reflected the fact that, we were moving up the waste hierarchy, and it wasn't so much about recycling materials, but reusing products as well. And then about 5 years ago, we changed the name more significantly to be Circular Community Scotland, really sort of putting our, fully embracing the concept of a circular economy in our identity, but staying very much rooted and grounded in the community sector, which is who we're trying to work with to deliver that part of the circular economy in Scotland. So our members work across the waste hierarchy, but predominantly at the top. Some of our members are doing waste education programs and consumption reduction programs. We've got sharing libraries that mean, everyone doesn't need to buy a drill. They can borrow a drill for, I want a hole in the wall, I don't want a drill. And there's research that shows that the average household drill is used 13 minutes in its life. So we don't all need to own one. And in my house, it might even be less than that, because I'm
in my house, it's much less than that.
But that's interesting, because we've been talking about the tool stations, haven't we, Alistair, in the past episodes about the tool stations, and the fact that it's not just tools, it's tents and bikes and things like that you can borrow, and it's quite amazing.
One of our members is called Music Broth, and they lend musical instruments. So, your child wants to learn an instrument. They don't need to buy one. You might not be able to afford to buy one. And you can borrow a musical instrument, and, obviously linked in with, other services around how you play that instrument, how you service that instrument and repair it. So you can anything that, it's funny, children grow up and we tell them, share. They're in the nursery, share that toy. And then we say, no, actually, let's own. Let's not share. Let's own up. And the more I own, he who owns the most wins is sort of the sort of value behind sort of consumerism. So sharing libraries of things, it's all about sort of pushing back on that a bit and saying we don't all need to own everything. And actually sharing can actually enhance your life. You might be having a party and want to borrow a chocolate fondue machine or a disco light ball or something. You might want to go camping once a year and borrow a tent or borrow a canoe. You don't necessarily need to own all those things. You might not be able to store all those things. So there's a lot of value. It's not all about the environment. It's often about quality of life in that as well, and having a sense of community in your high street. It might be you can borrow the drill, but do you know how to do the DIY jobs? So some workshops on the side of it that actually help you with the skills to use the DIY tools in a way that actually is going to mean you don't botch the job when you do it, as I would, and Alistair by the sound of it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. The other thing, just talking about that, Michael, what is the barrier then? Because you were talking about growth of these of the companies and all this sort of stuff, and they do seem quite niche. So how do we? I mean, it sounds like a brilliant idea and a great idea, but how do we expand that? How do they grow? What's missing?
I'm going to give you a bit of glasses half full and then glasses half empty analysis on that. So the positive thing I would say is in the time I've been in this organization, our membership has grown from 115 organizations to 268 today. I looked it up before coming on this.
Well done. So I was going to ask you that, Michael, if Jane hadn't got around to it. So just as well you did.
So there are more and more organizations working in this space in terms of doing, reuse, sharing, repair. We had a 3-year project, the Share and Repair Network, which is now part of our mainstream services. And that, we went from about having 25 share and repair projects in Scotland to between 90 and 100 today. So there is growth in the sector. But to give the glasses half empty and actually answer your question, there are certain things that make, when we're predominantly in a linear economy, circular economy behaviors are quite challenging to make sustainable. And so, for example, I would love to see more repair of tech and of household appliances. But as long as I can buy a new cheap toaster for 20 quid and get it delivered the next day from an internet retailer, repairing a toaster, which might require an hour's work and a part, it's really impossible to make that cost effective, to make that business model cost effective. So there's only really 2 ways you can close that. One is through subsidy, and the Scottish Government aren't flush with cash at the moment to subsidise these things. Other countries have. They have a €200 million repair voucher scheme in Austria, for example. But another way is through volunteers, and therefore it becomes a community initiative rather than a business initiative. And there are repair cafes in village halls across the country which don't have a huge amount of outgoings. They're not paying salaries. It's volunteer driven. And that is a way of working with people to get stuff fixed, but also provide, overcome loneliness, provide a bit of interaction in your community, use the village hub space to bring people together. And it's a really valuable service. But to bridge that gap and make it economic across the country and compete with, for example, internet retail, it really requires us to not have the linear economy that we have for that to then be a sustainable model. So you need to make the product from better quality parts and design with repairability built into the design, into the standard, and the parts being available and the skills being mainstream, and it being convenient, being on the high street. And that requires a shift in the whole way we do things at the moment, which is built around cheap products and convenient service, pretty much.
That was one of the questions I had for you in terms of I've been involved previously in not-for-profit organisations in the waste world, and it was always felt hand to mouth. They were always waiting for the next grant or waiting for the next support, and they had no sort of long-term security, and they would try all sorts in terms of long-term unemployed people being employed, training people, all sorts of different ways of doing it, but there was never anything that sort of glued them together. Do you think that's got better, or is that still a challenge for the sector?
It's definitely still a challenge for the sector. That hasn't gone away. I mean, if you put three of our members in a room, you'll have 5 different opinions about what the biggest challenge is for our sector. But reliable long-term funding is definitely one. The circular economy working with stuff needs, you never have a match between supply and demand. So storage becomes another one, and premises and cheap, affordable premises. So those things haven't gone away. But the flip side of it is that there are examples of sustainable business models that are working. And there is also examples of potential partnerships between the private sector or the public sector, local authorities typically, and the third sector to deliver impact at higher scale. And I think that's where the future lies. It's between finding ways to do it that is sustainable and pays for itself. Our members aren't particularly motivated by profit, but they certainly don't exist to make long losses, and they can't sustain losses over a period of time. So, they need to break even to maximize the environmental and social impact. But those issues haven't gone away. It's not just our sector, it's the whole third sector. You look at what's happening in social care or, other parts of the economy that, things have happened in the last year, like national insurance rates going up for employers. And that obviously affects businesses, but it affects the third sector too. And the third sector don't necessarily have the ability to increase what they charge. Sometimes they're not charging for their services at all. They're free at the point of use. So all of that is in the mix that it makes it harder for our work to be sustained. But I would still say our membership has grown in the last 5 years, and it is still growing. And I think it comes on the back of, for example, growing awareness in the importance of issues like climate change, but also cost of living crisis, social trends as well drive, waste isn't a good business practice. Wasting resources is not a sustainable business practice. And actually making better use of that resource it makes good business sense. But you've got to find the way to do it in a way that pays for it.
Is one of the challenges not, and I think myself and Jane talked about this last couple of weeks, is the not producing waste and reusing waste is actually really hard to quantify. It's hard to show a benefit, So if 20 people shared a lawnmower, there's no way of working out there's 19 lawnmowers not being bought and disposed of.
Yeah.
It's that contradiction you've got. You're doing good. You're the right place in the waste hierarchy, but how do you sort of demonstrate that benefit?
At Circular Community Scotland, we talk about 4 Ps. We talk about people, planet, pounds, and place. And if you wanted to sound a bit more sophisticated, you would talk about triple bottom line reporting, social, environmental, and economic benefits. So there are things you can track: job creation, poverty alleviation, social impact. So, for example, a couple of really good stats in those spaces. One is the Charity Retail Association and did a piece of work, and they quantified that for every £1 spent in a reuse shop, you get about £7.30 of social impact benefit. And that is upstream and downstream. So imagine I go in or someone from just creating their first home goes in and they buy a bed. The upstream benefit of that before that bed was sold is, someone has been a little bit of a job has been created for someone to collect that bed, repair it if it was broken, retail that bed. They got skills. They were far from the employment market. It's helped make them more employable, and it's sustaining that work and those skills. Downstream is that tenant, if they couldn't have afforded a new bed, they may have been made homeless. They may not have been able to maintain their tenancy. They might not have kept up with their rent. One of our members selling a bike, that bike might get someone to a job interview, which then gets them a job or keeps them in at college to get a qualification. So the social impact is upstream before and downstream after. So so that's the kind of benefits that you can research it and quantify it through research. But what we need to do is do a better job of articulating that our 260 members, how much they've done that across Scotland, and what those benefits are, and what it saves the public purse. Because often, starter pack organisations giving starter packs into people's homes, it's definitely preventing tenancies being dropped and all sorts of things. So it's about articulating that.
A lot of it is behavioural change as well, isn't it? It's like you said before, it's we like stuff, and we buy all this stuff and we don't do anything with it. It just sits in the cupboard. And again, it, like you said, like in a chocolate fondue,
Yeah.
you might need it once, but somebody else might have one, or you can get it from somewhere you can borrow it, or somewhere like that. But it is that kind of mindset as well, isn't it?
I noticed Kate Rayner from Bartek put up a wee comment in our last episode. One of the things she does at Bartek, that's the company she works for, is they do a second-hand swap shop at work. So they arrange a lunch or whatever where people bring in their items they no longer require, their, whatever, as you say, an ice cream maker or whatever it might be, and they bring it in, and somebody might be thinking about buying such a thing, and they just do a swap. So things like that, they do and can work quite well, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that relationship between people and stuff again. And to me, that's the sort of front line of the circular economy, or the, people talk about the leading edge. I sometimes talk about the bleeding edge. There's challenges with working at that point, but there's also tremendous rewards, and it can both change people's behavior and result in materials having a longer life. I hate the phrase secondhand, because secondhand indicates seconds quality or second best, as opposed to first hand. Who wants to come second in the Olympics? You want to come first, right? But our members would often more likely talk about pre-loved or pre-used, or, as putting it, and vintage goods. Actually these things have a bit of a story. They have a bit of character. People want to buy antiques to furnish their home more than flat pack furniture, because there's a certain element of story and character behind it. So how do we reframe reuse in that context? And I sort of think our job will be done in relation to a circular economy when it's not only socially acceptable, but socially desirable for me to give you a secondhand gift. Rather than buy you a new book, buy you a old book. That, because in a way then we've changed our relationship with what we want when we buy a book is the words on the page. It's the story. Is the information. The packaging isn't so important, so how do we understand, if you're buying a present for a new child, what does it say if you buy them cheap manufactured good from abroad versus something quality built to last that maybe has had a previous owner? But actually I'm saying that I want that child to grow up in a world where we make better use of our stuff and our resources, and as part of doing that, I've carefully selected a pre-loved good, not because I'm cheap. And I think, we're a long way away from that, but in a way that's the size of the behavior change transformation that needs to happen for reuse to become mainstream.
But I think, it's just very, I was just going to say, I mean, I look at my house, right? I might be in the minority, but a lot of my stuff has come from charity shops or secondhand furniture stores. Now we can call them pre-loved because, it sounds better. And I've had them for years, and it's like, I don't think I've ever I probably bought flat packed not chest of drawers, but bookcases. But that's probably about it. All the tables and sofas and stuff have all come from somewhere else.
But that's what I was going to ask Michael there. I think we're in a minority.
I think so too.
But in terms of I spent some time at CCL, the waste electrical recycler, yesterday, and the amount of stuff coming through that site is just incredible. As you say, Michael, plastic tat has been bought for presents. It's got some sort of electronics in it. A huge amount of stuff. So we've got a small percentage of the community is aware of this stuff, and they're quite, they will do, do I really need to buy it? Can I reuse it? Can I buy pre-loved? Whatever it might be. But there's a big section of the population that just have I'm not saying no clue about this, they just don't get it. And but sometimes there's contradictions in there as well, that you have people like that, but they'll also maybe buy lots of clothes and use Vinted for reselling their clothes, but they'll not think about doing that for other things. So how do we close that gap? How do we get that knowledge a bit better about doing the circular economy effectively, or thinking about it more?
I mean, even that is the $64,000 question. Because even the language we use on this podcast and in my profession that we use all the time, circular economy, reuse, I don't think if you went and did a survey on the street, many people would have a clue what you're talking about.
No, they
I think
don't.
if you
I
say
would,
if
yeah.
you say charity shop, or you say selling something secondhand on Facebook Marketplace
eBay
or
or something
eBay,
like that.
people Gumtree, people will get that. They will get that, but they won't probably connect it in any sense with environmental sustainability. They will probably, they will think about it as how to make a bit of money from your stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that motivation. But in terms of actually changing behaviors for the planet, if you look at the net zero progress that's been made over the last couple of decades, it's in green energy and it's in transport. How much of it has come from waste? Now, I know some of your members will be very invested in different bits of that, but even some of it has just been accounting. Our waste emissions have gone down, but some of that's because incineration is classed as being energy generation, not being part of the waste emissions. So there's been a bit of a shift in where that's been recorded. So I think we need to stay clear of too technical terms but what we actually need to do is appeal to people and understand that every product has a price and it has a cost, and they're different in our linear economy. The price of the product is what you pay for it when you buy it, but the cost is sometimes felt by the manufacturing abroad in poor working conditions, or the environment where those rare earth materials were taken out of a habitat that was then destroyed and it was paid by nature. And there's also cost at the end of its life suffered somewhere. It might be here in Scotland through, how the waste is treated. It might be shipped abroad. Also, there is a cost at the start and the end of life. How do we make the price of the product closer to the cost of the product so that there isn't those externalities, so that the climate or the planet or the, habitat loss in nature doesn't pay the price of our convenience? Now, there's something about product design in that. But there's also something about once we've got the stuff and it's in the using stage of our life cycle, how do we maximize that use? And, I think there's different motivations for different people. If you are struggling to eat and you're struggling to have shelter over your head, me talking to you about climate change is almost an insult. You've got bigger fish to fry at that point. I mean, I'm not saying they're bigger issues, but they're more urgent and pertinent to you. So, and all the research shows that about 10% of the world cause about 90% of the climate problem. We don't want to lecture the people that really don't cause it about them being the solution and guilt tripping them. But we do need to have a conversation in Scotland that, our material footprint is, 3 times or something the sustainable level. We do need to reduce it. We do need to make items last longer. And there's good economic reasons. Typically the jobs of manufacturing a new item are overseas in the Far East. Maybe the jobs for repairing and reusing it would be here on our high street. There aren't many jobs on our high street anymore, you may have noticed, with the advent of the internet. So there are benefits here in Scotland around job creation and around skill creation and green job creation that could be realized if we had a more circular economy. And that should be the way we're going.
And I suppose the circular bit, when we talk about a circular economy, what we mean is instead of throwing stuff away, as in the linear, we use it and then we put it back into the system somehow. So, on a basic basic definition, it's instead of throwing it away, we're trying to reuse it, or we're trying to bring it back into the system, or we're trying to add value or whatever, so that it doesn't get to that throwing away stage. I mean, that's basically what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the best way, unfortunately, to define a circular economy is to define the linear economy first and say it's not that. So the linear economy, typically oversimplifying global material flows, but typically you take something out the ground, you mine some resources, you cut down a tree, whatever it is, it's typically stuff coming out the planet, the Earth. You make it into something, you use it for a period of time, and then you throw it back into the ground. Obviously, landfill would be the classic image associated with the end of the linear economy. So the start is extraction, the end is landfill. Obviously, we're moving up the waste hierarchy and trying to get away from that model, both ends of the life cycle. But recycling is recycling materials. So if I recycle the laptop I'm talking to you on, it's the glass, it's the plastic, it's the metal. Reuse is reusing products. The laptop stays a laptop. So the better social and environmental outcomes are at the top of the waste hierarchy. So keeping it really simple, we shouldn't be recycling anything that can be reused. We should only recycle things that can't be reused, because how much effort has gone to create this laptop? It's a good laptop. Let's keep it being a laptop, not make it into just plastic and glass, which is a much lower value. And if it's broken, let's repair it. And if I don't need to own it at all, I can borrow it because I'm only going to use it once a party for a chocolate fondue machine. Then let's share it instead of own it. And so it's really trying to reduce that material footprint, keep those items in use as long as possible. And that's really what the circular economy is.
How do you think, Michael, do you think your organisation and members' organisations get enough support from the likes of Scottish Government to do what you're trying to do? Or do you think, obviously, budgets are always limited? What else? What would help yourselves and your members?
Let me answer it for ourselves. We are supported by Scottish Government and Zero Waste Scotland to deliver our core member services. We also get money from other sources, including trading and grant bodies. We would always like more, but I'm not complaining there. I think for our membership, who have a range of sources of funding, what I would say is it's getting harder in the current climate. There is more people asking for a smaller pot of money, and multiple levels we're seeing a squeeze, I would say. So you've got local authority money is much tighter, Scottish Government money is tighter, grant body money is often now oversubscribed. So, and typically it creates a bit, what you were talking about, that bit of hand to mouth in terms of financing, and that is a present reality for a lot of our members, and that makes it hard to do real strategic intervention. You do the urgent over the important, because you can't create permanent staff contracts. You do fixed term contracts and things like that. That all flows through to that. So I think there was a report by the Environmental Funders Network a few years ago that said the circular economy, the waste side of third sector work, was the Cinderella of funding. In other words, it hadn't been invited to the ball. In terms of environmental things, you want to do something on habitat loss or biodiversity or even green energy, or there is a lot of active travel, transport. Tends to be money goes to that, because, if you buy creating a windmill or a hydro scheme or buying an item of green transport, it's very visible and very tangible, and the carbon benefits are very quantifiable. Often you did this much electricity, and that's the carbon saving can be calculated from that. Whereas in our sector, the images associated in our sector are not wind turbines or hydro schemes or electric vehicles. They're tonnage diverted from landfill, which is a smelly landfill image, and it's not seen as clean and as attractive and as shiny as those things. We think that we need to be better at articulating the social and environmental benefits of reuse and repair and sharing, and quantifying it with a degree of accuracy and certainty. And we've been trying to work on a carbon tool to really give real clear carbon benefits. But as soon as you go down that hole, you do start getting into things like displacement assumptions. Your talk about the lawnmower earlier, sharing one lawnmower out 20 times, how many has it stopped being bought? It's probably not one, but it's probably not 20.
Yeah.
You might not have borrowed it from me. You might have borrowed it from a relative or something like that if you couldn't. So we don't know what the alternative behavior that never happened was. And so it is tricky. But we do need progress in that area to make it more clear what the benefits, social and environmental, are from these circular behaviours, and articulating them so that they get the support they need to deliver them.
So I'll probably say last question, and I'll fire loads more questions. Last sort of questions for me. It comes in two parts, actually. So if I want to know more about what your members do, first question is, where do I go to find that out? And second bit is, if I want to get involved, if I want to volunteer, etc., where do I go to find out?
So, brilliant question. Very happy to answer that. So go to our website, circularcommunities.scot. A couple of things I'll point you to: a publication page, and in that we have several impact reports. And in that, if you're a national organisation, you're interested in something on this podcast has sparked your interest and you want to see more about what I'm talking about and get under the skin of that, I would encourage you to look at our latest impact report. If you live, well, we all live somewhere. That's a stupid thing. If you live somewhere, whatever community you live in, if you're interested in getting involved with someone near you, Then we also have a member map. And if you go to our website and click Reuse Near Me, there's a map and you can see who, put in your postcode and see who is nearby. And you can even filter it by, materials, so bikes or furniture, be based on, we created the map actually for people wanting to donate stuff. And therefore, if you've got a bike, you don't want to donate that to a furniture organization. So you can filter it by that. But, I would encourage you to then go and investigate that organization, see if they, you want to volunteer, go and have a chat with them and see how you can volunteer.
Good. We're quite happy, as always, we're quite happy sharing these links, Michael. So we'll share
great.
that. You get them across to us. We'll share it in the show notes for anybody that is interested. So perfect. Thank you.
I'm just looking at your website now when you're...
Is this you not doing the prep before this interview again, Jane?
No, it was when he says places near me. I'm just looking at where there is near me. Not too bad. Not too bad.
Worth doing this podcast already.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in terms of the last question I'm going to ask you, where do you see everything? Where do you see it going? What's the ultimate aim?
Well, our vision as an organisation, I maybe should have started the podcast with that, but it's to see a circular economy in Scotland with all the social, environmental and economic benefits of that. And some people look at us, they think we're an environmental charity, but we're equally social. And some people think we're social, we're equally environmental. So we want to see a real circular economy where items that can be reused are reused, and the value of that action is retained here in Scotland. And that is job creation, and it's poverty alleviation. It's about equity and justice. One of our fundamental values is social and environmental justice. And to me, they're two halves of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. And so ultimately, in 20 years' time, say, I would love to see a sharing library on every high street. There's not enough on high streets, so I would love to see a sharing library on every high street. I would like to see a repair project where you can take the commonly owned household goods into a repair project if it's broken and get it fixed on every high street. So it is convenient. It can compete with internet retail. And I'd like to see reuse happening at scale as well.
Do you think there's going to be a point where funding isn't required anymore, that it's going to be self-sustaining? Is that the aim as well?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I spoke earlier about bringing the cost and price of products into alignment so that they're not externalized on planet or on people is that would create a fair playing field for the circular economy actors to actually be price competitive. If I can buy a cheap product that was made to last for a year, certain products, children's bikes, for example, they work out that a bike is only needed for 18 months and then the child's outgrown it. So they only design it to last 18 months. If they designed it to last 20 years, which they easily could do, and made parts available to repair it, then a repair economy could come along on the back of that and fix those bikes. Or a library model could come and share those bikes. Now, there are some great bike manufacturers, but it's not the norm. So for it to become the norm, you need to level out that playing field. And I think if you did that, absolutely, you could be a self-sustaining circular economy.
It's like a car. You don't necessarily own a car now. You lease it. So 3 years, you send it back and get a new one. So you could do that with bikes. You could borrow it for 18 months, give it back, get another one.
But anyway, you can do that. If you can buy a kid's bike for 30, 40 quid, it's quite hard to do that model. But if we had repairability and design standards that made the quality of bikes hit a certain standard, they would cost a bit more to buy, but it would mean that over the life cycle of their product, they would actually cost less.
I think that's a cracking place to leave it, Michael. I think this fitted in perfectly with our reduce and reuse message in previous episodes to give people a bit of food for thought of what they can actually do in practice. So thank you very much for sharing all your knowledge, and as I said, we're quite happy to put your links up in the show notes.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for the invitation to come on, and look forward to hearing from anyone off the back of this.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed our chat with Michael, all about Circular Community Scotland. Next week, myself and Jane are going to talk about recycling, what we really mean by recycling, and some of the issues that exist in the sector about recycling. So next week, usual time, Thursday, 4 o'clock, will be our episode 72 on recycling. And if you've not done it yet and you use TikTok, give us a wee follow on our TikTok account. Just search for Rubbish Talk.
Bye. See you next week.